my first time in Nur-Sultan, I actually heard about Astana from our colleague Alexander Idrisov, who I think it's here, and we were talking about nice cities in the globe. But I'm very happy to be here. It's wonderful to be in your city. We had the mayor opening the session today with our president, Deborah, so I really want to thank you for your hospitality and the city hospitality. And let's start this with a quick quiz on benchmarking jet holiday. So who in this room, who of you live in a city? Please raise your hand if you live in a city. In a city. Does anyone live in a city here? Okay. Okay, so put it down. Does anyone here live in the countryside? Please raise your hand if you live in the countryside. Okay, so we have a lot of city people here. I believe they have lots of questions to you, right? And I think there are two questions that I wanted to pose just for us to get started. One is about the content of the cities of the future. You mentioned sustainability, and the other one is how we get there. Yeah, what's the process to do that? And maybe just to get it started with you, Malika, and if you could maybe develop a bit on the projects that you have in your pipeline. What are the projects that you are envisioning, and that maybe your dream project for Nur-Sultan? What would that be? What would that project be really to transform the city landscape?
Thank you for the question. I think it's not just one big project or as a dream project, but numerous in different fields, because it's amazing. I think anything and everything for this city at this time is needed, because the world is developing so fast, and it's not just attracting new technology and implementing it here, but also keeping up with the pace of growing city. So I think one of the projects that we do see as a big project for the city is bringing here natural gas, and we do think that it's going to resolve the pollution question, at least partially. And I mean, that we are doing, understanding that we do have one of the cheapest energy production, costs in the world probably, but we still understand that for the city, in order to be sustainable and to have the comfortness and the quality of life that is suitable to the city of the standard, we do need to reduce the pollution that comes with the coal burning. And because the winters are so long almost, we do have central heating for almost 7 months a year. So that's one of the big questions, and that's, in our opinion, is going to resolve one of the large questions for the city and improve the quality of life. The second is, the question is, we do need to make the city greener, and that's a long-term project. You know, our first president, he has initiated this green belt around the city project, and the climate that we have now is much milder than it used to be, and I think that has to be developed more, because now the general trend is that people want to stay outside longer. So the more comfortable and useful zones for people to just stay outside, have a walk with the family, and I think that part also is very important for the city. So we do have a strategy to increase those areas, because as now the city looks as if it's designed for cars, and a lot of cars. And even though we do have that problem, I think we gotta move into a different level of quality of life in the city. Also many projects in the field of innovation and technology. I think that's absolutely useful with the technology that is now available. I think security should be one of the main issues, because by the index of secure cities, we have to, see ourselves where we are going. So those questions are, I think, on the list. then probably mosquito problem also. No matter how, I mean, at this point it's not a problem, but during the season. So the city, it has an issue of grant projects where it's aiming long term, but then there are also very small challenges or everyday challenges that it has to settle. Therefore, if you don't have a strategy to achieve all of those targets, I think it's really hard to get the result.
Just a follow-up on the natural gas project. Where do you stand in terms of implementing that project?
At this time, the main pipeline is almost here. It's by the end of this month is going to be almost here in Nur Sultan. So a few days ago, the construction of the the whole system, the gas system in the city has started. So we do see that by the next year, by the end of next year, we are going to be starting off with using gas.
So you're very close to that. Yeah.
Well, we are at the first stage, but
Yep.
yes, the first stage is to, the central heating has to be changed into natural gas. So, I mean, for the main part, yes, we are going to start the first stage, but then there's also much more because there are also private housing, just like you said, the neighborhoods that have to be by one implemented and then turned to natural gas heating instead of a coal heating. This is what they do now.
Great, fantastic. I think you mentioned things like innovation, technology, like positioning the city as a global city in your presentation. I think those are all topics that we will explore in this conversation. And this conference, we have people from 20 different countries here. 2 years ago, we were in Malaysia, and it was also my first time there, and places like Cyberjaya, Putrajaya, impressive. Yusuf, you lead MITE, the Malaysian Industry Government Group for High Technology, doing a bunch of things on innovation, technology, but connecting with aspects like cities. Maybe if you could share your perspective on cities and technology and all the linkages connected to that.
Sure. Well, to start with, well, I live in Putrajaya, the Federal Administrative Center, the new Federal Administrative Center for Malaysia. Why did I raise my hand fully just now? Because we are still moving towards a smart city, in our pursuit. And Kuala Lumpur is a city that has been around for some time in Malaysia as the capital, and has actually, engaged in various smart city, activities. But the one that I'm much more involved, Roberto, is that of a very historic city in Malaysia, a bit south of Kuala Lumpur. If you have been to Malaysia, it's called Malacca. And Malacca was a smart city in the 15th century because it was the powerhouse for ports. And it attracted merchants from China and also from the other side, India. So it was the focus point. Even Singapore did not actually exist as a port at that time. It has a lot of things going for it. It was very safe. It was very cultural, attractive. Chinese merchants, Indian merchants, basically, set up their families there after they did their business. We have people after that from Portuguese, from Dutch, and etc. came to Malacca, and it's now a melting pot of various cultures. And I think when we actually look at smart city development, Roberto, is also to balance between the technological part and the non-technological part. I think yesterday we discussed it as being soft elements and also the hard elements. This is very important. And no cities are alike. I mean, you have your own true north. What are you actually trying to achieve when you want to build a smart city? Malacca has a very conservative, pursuit. It is a historical city. It is recognized by the United Nations as the heritage city. Therefore, it has a lot of constraint in terms of putting elements into a city. That means it has to maintain certain existing buildings, infrastructure that cannot be changed. So it looks into other best practices. If you go to Amsterdam, bicycle is the best mode of transportation, and it's smart for a city to have that kind of mode of transportation. It doesn't release any carbon dioxide, and you can access to any place in Amsterdam. But for us to cycle in Malacca, which is a tropical city, you might only finish 5 kilometers before your clothes are all drenched with sweat. You can't do it. So you look at another city, it's smart over there to do that, but in your place, it may not be that smart. So you have to actually look at the whole true north of what you're going to actually achieve with that smart city. Now the case of Malacca is that it is a very attractive place for tourists. And they have 14 million tourists a year, and most of them came from Singapore. Because, Singapore is an island south of Malaysia. They want to, spend their weekends in Malacca, where you can, your money becomes 3 times valuable. There's a lot of things that you don't have in Singapore that you have in Malacca, and they spend a lot of time in Malacca. And as a result, the traffic congestion become a problem every weekend. So how do you resolve this if your objective is to remain as a very attractive tourism spot or tourism place? So as a city that actually trying to meet the objective of tourists, you have to actually provide all these facilities. So again, whether you're going to maintain that UN heritage status and still think about what kind of technology that you can actually introduce to make sure that transportation are being operated in the best of way, so that the tourists are very comfortable, they are very and does not affect too much the environmental situation. So you have to plan for that. So again, these are things that have been thought of, and then electrical bus is a good choice. And then suddenly, a company from Japan came over and said, use our car, because with this car, you don't, it's not the house that is powering the car can power the house, and that makes a true, another alternative for people to think about how do you, do that. And that makes another level of decisions. It's no longer that individuals will decide to, what kind of cars they're going to have. The cities are now deciding what kind of transportation mode that is going to be there and the kind of cars that you're going to drive. Because the young people are no longer interested to own cars. So they are going to lease it. So the automotive companies are thinking that, it's no longer about advertising to individuals now, it's about advertising to local authorities or a city authority. It's a different marketing altogether. So what you see, the whole of, thing that's happening is going to be evolutionary, is going to make sure that cities are able to adapt to many of these changes to make itself relevant, and so that it doesn't, defeat its objective. Roberto.
I would like to leave one question for you for our next round. That's like this. When Malika was presenting, I think that you were saying there are some big problems or some problems that come with growth. The city is growing like 5% a year. And problems are good in the sense that they create demand. They create demand for construction, for transportation. So there's an opportunity there. And the question that I want to leave for you to think, Yusuf, is how could we connect that with industrial development and leveraging new technologies, something that we're actually doing at MITE. But before going to that, I think that you really highlighted this aspect that cities are about people, and it's not really the technology itself, it's a tool. And one of the things that we were commenting, Anwar, when I came here is that I was very surprised by the city, because I come from a place that's much more centered around the car than Nur Sultan. That's Brasilia in Brazil. That was built from scratch, very much centered around the car. And I was saying, hey, I actually went jogging here, people are walking. I really loved the city. And what we were saying right Anwar is, how could we put Nur Sultan in the global map? So, and I know this is something that you've been working, you've been putting a lot of thinking on that and working on that. So what's your strategy?
Good afternoon. That is very interesting and very hard question. When our team started to work with Office of Mayor about the future Nur Sultan development, we asked himself what Nur Sultan should be. It is a very important question because honestly, previously it was a very small, like a regional center from the middle of nowhere. How to develop this kind of city? And we make like an ideal picture of global city. For us, it is like a coincidence of 5 hubs: people, finance, trade, political events, and information. Then we ask a very simple question: what kind of hub we could be? And you see the strategy is start work. It not only of us, because we start to gather the puzzle. IFC is here. It's like a potential financial center. We are not be like a big trade hub because we are very, very far from the traditional trade roads. But what we can do, we can attract people. From this point of view, to be global in our understanding, it is to be like a global magnet for the talent. And then the second question, what we do for this? We already have some very important piece for the youngster, Nazarbayev University. Then we have, from one side, the very fast growth of city create the problem, but from another side is creating opportunities. Also for talented entrepreneurs, for talented young people. So, and then next question, how to sell city in the good way, how to sell city. And right now, I think the answer is clear. You are here. Almost yesterday, we asked the audience from GFCC, it is your first time in Kazakhstan? The common answer was, it is my first time in Central Asia. So, be global means be attractive for the global people, for the global talent. Attract the best people. It's again about the people.
And what is your dream project for the city in order to leverage that, to catalyze that attractiveness?
My dream project, it's again related with people. My dream project that the city can create like a inclusive educational platform which can transform migrants who came to the city to the, how to say, to the powerful human and social capital. I think it is the most important issue and most important project for the city.
If I'm not wrong, there are 14 higher education institutions here in Nur Sultan, right?
Yes, and a few new university is in the pipeline. This autumn, the new IT university was opened, and another one, like Astana International University, was also opened. So this is like city continue its way to be a magnet for youngster.
Jim, you are a university leader coming from New Zealand, a country and a place, a city, Auckland, that's known for livability, right? So what's your take in relation to this conversation? And I think in a few minutes we'll talk more like hard aspects, how to build the cities of the future. But I really wanted to hear from you about this aspect of livability, attracting students. What's critical in that context?
Well, like you, Roberto, Auckland, I come from a city which chose to be built around the private motor vehicle and has been paying the price for it ever since. And in fact, is retrofitting a public transport, an underground inner city rail loop. We know exactly what the cost of that is. It's about $1 million a metre. So yes, Auckland is in many ways attractive because of climate and situation, which doesn't mean to say we've made good decisions in terms of the development and growth of the city. But we're also a relatively small country in a city of 1.5 million people. We're not that much bigger than Nur Sultan. So we don't have the huge challenges, if you like, that some of the really big cities have. But we do have, as I said, a very attractive, the lifestyle, the natural advantages of New Zealand, and Auckland's challenge has been its growth, that it has also had a very steep growth curve. And New Zealand also sees the same urbanisation movement that we see globally in migration to the cities, and then the pressure on the infrastructure of the cities that arises from that growth. And in fact, one of the challenges at the moment is to try and keep regional New Zealand alive and productive, because if you have a strong agriculture-based economy, your regions are extremely important to you. Deborah mentioned this morning describing cities as the epicenters of innovation. And so that migration to the cities is driven by the sense of opportunity, the sense of innovation, the excitement that large cities can generate. But that comes with challenges. That comes with real challenges in terms of the social license, if you like, around how those cities develop and what they look like. We increasingly, if you look at the UN projections of the largest cities in the world, by 2035, Delhi is 43 million people. Greater Tokyo is about 36 million, with Shanghai not very far behind. And that is a different problem to 1.5 million people entirely. And the social license that those two cities, Delhi and Tokyo, will look very different because of things like the age profile of those populations. Delhi will be a young city relative to Tokyo, for example. And the way that the decisions that people make, Margarita this morning mentioned the decisions of the social conscience of Generation Z, and the fact that they are much more global and mobile and interested in sustainability and reacting to climate change. Those are the forces which are going to shape our cities much more.
What's the percentage of foreigners living in Auckland? Do you have that?
Auckland is one of the great multicultural cities. Even though it's only 1.5 million people, there are 160 languages spoken in Auckland. So you have a very significant cultural diversity within the city. And that is increasing all the time, because if you look at migration and look at the patterns of movement, our relationship to the Pacific and Asia in particular, it is a very dynamic population.
Malika, do you see that happening here? More people coming from abroad to live, to start a business, to study?
I think general with the expat community in Kazakhstan overall, the people that I know, once they come to Kazakhstan, they find their ways to just stay here forever. They love everything, the culture, the food, I mean, the hospitality, everything. So I think in that regards, more and more people are going to be coming here as well. And we do see that, I mean, more foreigners coming to Nur Sultan also. With also the and the customs union with other countries that we have, because it is a better tax climate to open an office of a company here instead of in another country that is our neighbor. So some of the people, the foreigners, they do come and start their business here, and then they expand also to other countries. I think geographically it's not a bad location.
Jerry, you come from a very small city called New York City, right? Not very diverse, but it's a city that went through a big transformation, and you were part of that. You actually wrote a book, was one of the authors, trying to analyze different generations of smart cities. What happened in New York? How has New York become more tech-oriented, for instance?
So thank you for being here. And New York City is an interesting city. We have about 8 million people in the city itself, and around us about 40 million people, so about the size of the Shanghai you described. And also like Auckland, 160 languages spoken. So one of the things that we did was ask ourselves, picking up on Yusuf's idea, this is a good idea. What's your true north? What are your assets that you have already that you can capitalize on to transform yourself? So instead of starting totally from scratch, what do you build on? And what we had in New York was diversity. We had 4 or 5 big markets, the media market, television, movies, financial, big healthcare system, but we didn't have a tech community. So we said, to have a tech community, you need more engineers, more scientists, more venture capital. So one thing we did was we said to the world, here's an island that we aren't using, bring a university here, and we'll help you set up shop to compete with the universities. I was running one of them, NYU, compete with NYU and make this a more vibrant city. So we took assets, our diversity, some empty land, and said, how can we capitalize that and change the tenor of the city? And it worked. Cornell said they would come. They said they'd spend $2 billion of their money to build a new university in New York City. So in many ways, you take your true north and you take your ambitions and you try to find a way to combine those to expedite the process. And it really changes between big cities and medium cities and small cities and developed cities and developing cities. So I wouldn't argue there's a cookie cutter plan for how you make a smart city or how you transform a city. You have to ask, where are we at? Where are we headed? What are our assets? But it's been quite powerful. So in the last 10 years, we've created 360,000 new jobs in the high-tech industry. There's been nearly 70 incubators created in New York. Now we're a big city, so we can do that. But scale it appropriately to your city and ask the question, could you have 5 incubators? Could you have more venture capital? And all that leads back to, I think, a more fundamental view I have of cities, which picks up on Deborah's famous line, which is, talent is the oil of the 21st century. Every mayor I talk to around the world has one big thing in mind, which is how to bring economic growth to their city. And to bring growth, they need brains. They need smart people who know how to build things, who can take risk, who like the adventure of building new things. And so in many ways, the first thing I think a city does to transform itself is says, be appealing to the kind of people who like an exciting life. And that means a lot of different things. It means, in part, a lot of entertainment, a lot of places to ride your bicycle, to exercise, to see people, to socialize. But it means more than that. It means so that you have enough women in the workforce. It means good daycare. It means something we learned in China. A mother will let her children walk to school if the school's within a mile of where they live and the traffic's not faster than 35 miles per hour. What's that, 50 kilometers? So if you design a city that way, mothers can let their children walk to work, which means mothers can go to work. Mothers can let their children walk to school, meaning mothers can go to work half an hour earlier. It's okay, small thing, but a valuable thing in terms of attracting talent. A nice city to look at, in my view, is Helsinki. A smaller scale. Its master plan is most functional city. And functional to them means giving citizens what they need to live a great life. So it leaves everything from the issues I said about bicycling, sports, activity, but it also means the education to advance, the offices that are fun to work in, the city that's easy to get around in. So functional city, in my view, is almost as important as smart city. The only reason you're being smart is so that people can have a great life. Being smart alone is not sufficient for a city. And finally, one, I think, interesting piece of Helsinki is a neighborhood set up a project to save everyone an hour a day of wasted time. So think of that as a goal that a neighborhood could have, which is, how do I make it easier to buy groceries? How do I make it easier to find the bus? How do I make it easier to save an hour? A very close to people way to make a city smart. And some of that we're seeing in New York as we try more and more to let people get to work sooner, have an easier life, use bicycles more, etc.
You lead Smart Cities New York. Does smart city mean a different thing in New York than in Kuala Lumpur?
Yeah. I think absolutely. There's no way that a city like New York, which has masses of people, can use connectivity to do all kinds of things, would be the same as a smart village in India. A smart village in India might want to have satellite connectivity, might want to have good electrical power, certainly doesn't need a smart subway, doesn't need a smart advertising. We have kiosks all over New York City. Well, you don't need kiosks all over a smart village. So tailor it to what you need to make your people's lives more functional, powerful, productive, happier. Then you've got a smart village, a smart town, a smart city, a smart mega city.
Yusuf, so asking to you now, this difference or maybe the opportunities related to smart cities, and once again, considering that MITE works with cities, you've been doing foresight, you've been driving projects, but you are also driving industrial development. How do you connect those things in terms of foreseeing, building new solutions, and driving industry through that?
Well, before I answer that question, Roberto, is very interesting question you made between New York and Kuala Lumpur. If we copied New York, many of our pedestrians would actually be knocked down by cars in Kuala Lumpur, because in New York, New Yorkers can stop a car, when they cross the street. We need pedestrian bridges to cross safely. So that's a different culture altogether. But anyway, it's a very interesting point about a city makeup. Well, I'm part of the Science Park and Industry Park community, and we have this situation, I'll describe it as, we call it the areas of innovation. You see, where traditionally industries are located outside of cities, You know, you build science parks, industrial parks, technology parks, all outside the city. And I think that has been the trends in the past. But now you are seeing that these industries are moving slowly into the city. Well, you have, for example, 3D printing. You don't need a big plant to produce parts now. You can have a small room with a 3D printer, and you can start to manufacture things cleanly, environmentally friendly. You're going to be accepted by the city because you're going to provide jobs. In the past, these kind of plants will be considered as dirty, is polluting, and all those negative elements. So you see the innovation is actually bringing some of these activities into the city. I think Michigan is a very good example where the automotive industry is actually in the city. So you will find that you have a new challenge now, because not only are you just managing businesses or the likes of financial business or retail or commercial, you now have to actually fit the industry, a traditional industry which was supposed to be outside the city, now coming slowly into the city. So you need electric, utilities that are stable. You need strong supply of water and etc. So you need to have those kind. Even waste management will be slightly, requiring higher specifications. Of course, on the other hand, sensor technology, AI, and etc. are changing the way cities are being managed. I think in many ways, these have improved transportation, this has improved energy efficiency, this has improved a lot of things to cities. So cities can be managed now much better by an authority which have on its dashboard electricity usage, water requirements, transportation issues, and etc. You can see all those things happening, in just one room. You can make good decisions, real-time decisions then. But you also have to look at how that is going to affect things that you are considering important. For example, your human relationship, your human interactions. In Iskandar, one of the city in south of Malaysia, they start to build buildings with elevators starting at the 3rd floor. They want to encourage people to walk at least 3 floors before you get to the elevator. And during that course of walking, they are going to interact with their other tenants, neighbors, which they will not, you can imagine, right? You go back, you go to work, come back to work at 7 p.m., and then you go straight into your house, and then you start doing, your own stuff, and then tomorrow you go back to work. You never even see your neighbor. But that's not the kind of, maybe in terms of cultural needs of certain cities. Interactions is very important. Freedom in terms of, walking around or to practice your religious activities needs to also to be considered into that equation. So technology, yes, they may be able to make certain things efficient, but they may take away certain of that quality of life, that kind of things that you actually treasure more. So you need to make sure that those things are not, totally excluded from your plan.
So you are really making the case about solutions by design, not just deploying technology, but designing, let's say, smart solutions. Yeah. Do you have at mind any specific program in terms of funding, startups, or industry drive oriented or focused on cities to create new solutions for cities?
I think, states or cities are not necessarily financially endowed. Not all cities, like Nur Sultan, has all the money in the world to spend. So cities are sometimes find it challenging to fund certain activities in the cities. Developing cities like those in Malaysia are very fortunate, because if you can get in touch with certain multilateral organizations like United Nations, Industry Development Organization, they actually provide funds for cities of below 1 to 2 million to solve their problems using funding from UNIDO. But the other thing that is very important is that the private sector involvement has to be brought in, not only in terms of innovation, but also in terms of solving some of these problems and bringing some of the resources that you may need. So the city should not actually look at its development just on its own. Government involvement, yes, is necessary, but the private sector will be the one making the difference. They will actually bring all those innovation into your place. But I also find out in my Malacca experience, there are research that is done in the university which did not see the light of day can suddenly be used in a particular city applications. You know, there was a research on a toilet which doesn't use water. And in a city where you have a lot of tourists, you cannot, you know, they can't just go into any hotels and do their business. They need to be accessible to some of these facilities. And you have a toilet which does not use water. And the excretion that is can be turned into fertilizers. So you have kind of a circular economy. The more you take out certain things, it can actually turn into money. So these are the innovation that the university is doing. Couldn't find a place for it, but it suddenly find a place in Malacca, and when there's any festivities or events that involve tourists, they actually put the toilets there. So it's very interesting that these, if you look at it with an open mind, there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of things that you actually can do in a city as it progresses.
Jerry.
So I think from the competitiveness point of view of countries around the world, one thing that's missing in the world right now is a place where experimentation about the future of cities is consolidated and learned from each other. And I think more and more we're seeing cities are the place where the action takes place on how people live, providing a better way of life. But we need to have cities talking to each other and teaming up. Probably based on size. So New York City and Paris and London, Moscow, Shanghai maybe are talking to each other. But then as we work our way down size, have that group of cities around the world talking to each other. Because you've heard right here, ideas coming from Malaysia, from Auckland, from here in Kazakhstan, that would be very well traded around the world, developed better, and then used. And I would say that one thing would be on my list would be a series of cities that team up and exchange their information. Some of them exist. There's an alliance of cities in Europe that comes down from Stockholm, works its way down through France and into Italy, where they do meet twice a year and talk about what worked, what didn't work, how to make it better. Same thing could happen. We could organize that around the world in a layer set of cities and get these ideas for everybody.
Malika, Anwar, how do you do that? How do you do benchmarking? What are the platforms, and maybe what would be something that would be additional, that would be relevant for you to accelerate transformation here?
I think we have a very clear criteria in order to benchmark. First of all, it is climate. We investigate around the world and define some people, some cities with the same, more or less same climate conditions. Then we just see what they to do. And for us, my personal opinion, Minnesota is the most close benchmark for us. Because cold, because windy, but personally, I'm not believe in the benchmarks. It's okay, but every city has his unique way. This is my strong belief, and our way is to become like a city platform. As Malika say, we want to see Nur Sultan as a frontier, as a place when the Turkic, European, and Islamic culture will mix and create something new. Because we also strongly believe that the most creative idea output when the different culture mixed. So this is.
Great. We will open for questions, but before I do that, Jim, you said $1 million per meter. That's what's costing to change or transform the city in terms of sustainability.
Certainly, one of the very big challenges you have in that kind of infrastructural transformation is who pays for it. Because increasingly, the costs of infrastructure within a city, you distribute it across a population, which is, in the case of Auckland, only 1.5 million people. These are very big investments and very politically fraught for the people who undertake them. So one of the major barriers to that kind of transformation is taking the taxpayer or the ratepayer in the city with you on that journey of transformation. People really have to believe in the value because it disrupts their lives and it is a great investment, great deal of money for them to invest. And I see this as an increasing challenge, certainly in New Zealand, is the costs of that infrastructure move beyond the realm of what the people, the residents, are able to pay for, and where governments don't want to be seen to be favouring one city over another, for example.
Let's, Jerry, quick.
We're starting a new project in the United States based on how to improve infrastructure construction. My view is we're paying an enormous tax for the cost of building infrastructure around the world because it's been the construction industry's been the slowest to adopt technology, to use new techniques, and to reduce those costs. And it just shows up as a tax as $1 million a mile, or is that right? No, $100 million a mile. So it's an enormous burden, and it needs to be solved. It should be on the competitiveness agenda.
Great. So let's open to the people. Any questions to our panelists? Bob.
I noted a question here. To me, cities are really, they're a system. They're major systems and a set of subsystems. So to be successful, I think there's need for a reference architecture somewhere, and standardization, and a roadmap. Does anyone have any thoughts on this system or subsystems to be coherent?
I think there have been a number of issues, a number of attempts to create city protocol, a set of ISO standards for cities. They exist. The problem's been that there is a system overall that's got nodes, transportation, housing, et cetera. But the application of it is so unique, as we've heard and discussed here, from city to city based on assets, based on needs, et cetera. It's been hard to move that down to a level of saying, well, there's an A kind of city and a B kind of city and a C kind of city. There's 1,000 kinds of cities or 1 million kinds of cities. We haven't got there yet. And I think we like the diversity of our cities. In some ways, part of what makes them attractive is they're not the same. So a system, but it's hidden from view.
Any other questions? Deborah.
I can't remember the name of the scholar who said this some years ago about cities, but he said in order for cities to be successful through history, they have to be safe, they have to be busy, and they have to be sacred. No one has commented at all on what makes a city sacred. How do you define the soul of a city? Because increasingly, that's one of the great attractions of where people want to live. It's not just entertainment. It's also something that gives you a special feeling of being connected to a place that matters in the world.
Any comments on the soul of a city? We had a final question here. Someone had a Bill, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any tax credits around improving cities? I mean, in other words, have any cities instituted incentives from local businesses? It doesn't have to be quite local, but maybe major businesses in those communities to get them to invest in infrastructure to help offset let's call it the green building costs, that sort of thing. And the transit system. I'll take New York City, for example, has a very comprehensive subway system, but it's not very attractive. It's functional, it gets you there. But wouldn't it be nice if people could go to work in a much more comfortable setting? In other words, using credits like that towards improving that in different cities. I'm just wondering if there's anything like that out there.
Any reactions?
The closest I see is, let's call it the Uber phenomenon that took on an inefficient taxi system and it said, I'll show you a new way to get cars to move around. Those are sort of private sector looking at inefficiencies. You're raising it on the other side, which is we create a tax incentive. The one incentive that has worked is essentially the argument that if you invest in a vital, exciting city, enough companies come to town, enough people come to town that the tax revenue increase from that population, that economic growth, totally pays for everything you did on infrastructure. But it's the other direction. It's do it first and they will come.
You were saying something? No. So my final question, final round, just to finish this, we run out of time, is what is the city that has a soul that resonates with each one of you? And it cannot be the city where you live. And I will make this simpler for you, Anwar, and you, Malika. So it cannot be for the both of you. It cannot be in Kazakhstan. So what's the city that resonates, that has a soul that resonates with you?
I think to me it's Singapore.
Singapore.
Do I have to explain why or not just the city, right? Okay.
Just the city. We'll have time for the explanations.
Tucson, Arizona.
Tucson, Arizona. Jim.
It's an extremely difficult question because cities have a soul, they have a distinctive character, and you love them for different reasons. I look at cities like Paris, for example, but I think that's a very difficult question to answer.
Paris, for example. Yusuf.
Well, again, it's very difficult to pick up one city, but I think Tokyo bring a special spiritual thing to me. I mean, it has, in terms of its hard infrastructure, and even the people actually bring out that kind of feeling to me. Yeah.
Jerry?
So I'm going to say Delhi, because it's a city that just feels like it's screaming at how can I do it better? How can I bring myself into a way to live well? And finding it so frustrating, but it's a great city to feel like you could sink your teeth into it and make a difference.
I am an urban animal, so this whole conversation has really resonated, not just with my mind, but my soul. So thank you so much. I've learned a lot and I had fun. Thank you so much.